we're sitting in our Zoom rooms going around America, which is totally fantastic. So
Yeah, it's too bad we can't film it outside, so I can show you what it looks like outside too. I have nothing in here that represents Dallas at all.
famous, yeah. What do we know about Dallas? The Cowboys, Dallas Cowboys.
That's Cowboys, yeah.
Yep.
May I present the Augusta Victoria College for Girls.
Welcome to Augusta Victoria. There's been an alliance between England and Germany for many years.
What sort of Englishman would accept a post teaching Herr Hitler's League of German Girls?
Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
We should keep an eye on him.
All right, guys. Well, what's great about a movie like this is it feels through the experience that you've gone through an entire war almost, because you're making the micro feel macro in a way. And by the end of it, I'm like, there's so much that obviously happened beyond this, but because it's such an intimate experience and I feel for everybody and I get a taste of everything of what's going on, you feel like a bit exhausted by it all, but yet there's so much more there. And I'm curious, like, how much you guys thought about that when you were writing it, that this is just a snapshot and a little piece in the full scope of the war, or actually before the war started.
I'll say a little bit, and then I'll share it with Celyn, since we're all writers. Yeah, I think those are the stories that I find kind of fascinating. I think if you set yourself to a broader church, the storytelling can get a little bit baggy, and I think it's always about finding, as you say, that snapshot. Celyn and I made a film about Dylan Thomas once. I remember in the conversations about writing the script, it's like, well, at what point do you come in? What snapshot do you tell? I remember Celyn always had this phrase, he used to see the world at a grain of sand. That was that idea of, we found this the lost weekend that Dylan Thomas had before. Well, maybe we could tell his story within this sort of macroness, and yet you're actually telling a bigger story. And so it was with this. It's on the cusp of World War II, but it's filtered through this kind of microcosm of these girls in this school in Bexley-on-Sea. And I always like stories like that, where kind of you almost deliberately ring fence yourself. And then I think it forces you to kind of think harder as a writer, and certainly work harder as a director. And just in terms of, well, what choices does your character do next? What is the polarity of your character going in and out of the scene within the context of this kind of sequestered school, in the seaside town? So I'm always drawn to those kind of stories where there is, the framing of it is deliberately tight. You almost write yourself into a corner to then kind of, I think those limitations can be a virtue. But this script had a life before I came on board with Eddie and Celyn, so Celyn can sort of tell you a bit more.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so funny when we sort of talk about a life before it, but it was all kind of a very kind of natural, organic process. I think, Eddie Izzard showed me the school badge of this school that existed and wanted to turn a story, which is this school for high-ranking Nazis sent their daughters and goddaughters to a finishing school in England before the Second World War. Wow. There was a swastika and a Union Jack on the same school badge. Truth. It's true. And the kids went back to Germany, ended up in the true story, so just before the Second World War. So a myriad of questions. Eddie had this idea of this character with dual sort of heritage. So he was British, English, and German. What would that be like teaching at that school, turning up there? And then it just leads us on this process of what pre-wartime, the sort of the tension in the air. We know what's happening on the 3rd of September in 1939. We know the Second World War is coming. So we could tell this sort of macro story, like we say, inside this school, under the sort of like types of a nod to these Hitchcockian thrillers, these 1930s, 1940s Ealing style films, which we loved. So, and then when we needed a director on board, Andy had just finished on shooting a thing over in America and came back, and it was just very organic. So even though it had a life between Eddie and I, it was just sort of that's just the staging of the process, really. The three of us sort of wrote this story and brought this film to life, and it was all about playing that sort of tonal balance of the characters inside the school, what is happening outside, not only outside the school, but outside, across the water in Europe, and using all those kind of real things, the real things from history, to kind of put pressure on the writing to push these characters, to watch them kind of grow, and put your protagonist up a tree and throw stones at them and watch them make their way down, as they say. So I love the fact that you picked up on this kind of macroness of the story, because we like to give people bang for their buck, and if we sort of embed it in the real kind of truth of this story and the real history of this story, then we can sort of fly with the kind of with our own sort of storytelling sort of through there. And even Andy and Chris Segra, the DOP, pushed this on a visual scale as well, by sort of trapping the girls inside the school by light and keeping the light out. You can jump in here, Andy, you can explain it better than I can, but the idea of the last summer, isn't it, of Britain?
Yeah, it's the last summer. It's the idea that like everybody, entrapment was like kind of, it was kind of like a buzzword when we were talking about visual themes, just the idea that like this sense of entrapment in the school, entrapped by the location, entrapped by history, entrapped by Nazism, there was just sense of claustrophobia that we're trying to instill in the school, and this kind of thinking of films like The Beguiled or Black Narcissus, the idea of like women sequestered away in this kind of hermetically sealed location, and it being a pressure cooker, just a pressure cooker of burgeoning adolescence, as well with all the themes of fascism and Nazism that is orbiting a thriller story.
Yeah, I like that you bring up all those films like The Beguiled, but even earlier with the Hitchcockian style to it, because that's, it's very tense. There's a lot of sequences that are extremely tense, but yet there are also really good moments, especially at the end, where it has like a Dead Poets Society kind of moment as well. Is that because there's so many elements in there, and there's so many things that you need to achieve with this storytelling, and as you said, trying to dip into the truth, but you got to color in these gray areas yourself? Is it difficult to navigate that tone for as filmmakers, storytellers?
Yes, and I guess you find some of that in the edit as much as you do when you're filming it. And I guess we're aware that we're under the shadow of the certain genres have been done really well. So kind of the teacher fighting for the hearts and minds of his pupils, like as a genre, that's been served quite well, and Dead Poet Society is a kind of obvious reference, and it was there, and you try and navigate around it, but at the same time there comes a point you just have to accept that if there is an overlap, then maybe don't fight it, and I think Eddie has that about him. I think Eddie, as a leading man, has a pathos and a watchability that someone like Robert Williams has. So we knew we wanted that scene to break your heart at the end of the film, and then with the kind of the wrong man thriller genre, that was the genre that we're playing to, and so you're aware of those running man motifs, and how when you embark on that, you're sort of whether by accident or design, you can't help but reference some of these films in a way. And in a way, part of it, we spoke about these things so much when we were writing it, that it's like, well, why not let it be a bit of a love letter to those movies that we loved, There's a reason we love them, and they were instrumental in us going down this road to become filmmakers. So, tone, there's a lot of light and shade in this film. There's a lot of weighty themes. At the same time, there is a lightness of touch in some of the sequences. I think we just like taking the audiences on a journey, you turn a corner and you have a kind of a slapstick sequence by the seaside, as some of these old films did. They had these wonderful little character cameos, actors popping up just like a minute or two, but who are very memorable, I remember in The Lady Vanishes, there's the two characters, Charters and Caldecott. They're like these two kind of cricket buffs who happen to be on the train, and they become embroiled in the story. They proved so popular with audiences that they were put into other movies, and I just love that idea. Like, I can't think of a modern equivalent of that. I know Michael Keaton played that FBI agent didn't he, in two movies, Ray Nicolette. But I just love the idea of why don't we do that more? It's like, just these, and they became characters in their own right. So yeah, it's tough, and sometimes you discover in the edit that maybe you need to sort of modulate things or rein things back. But yeah, and ultimately the audience will tell you as well.
Yeah. How did you guys go about writing or balancing the writing responsibilities? Did you discover some strengths that you had in yourself and as well as each other throughout this process?
Oh yeah, I mean, Andy and I had written a film together before, so we had a real shorthand and a trust there. So because we've done it before, we have a we have a way we work together, and we sort of meet and discuss and talk it through and imagine together, and then we both go away and write and then swap parts. With Eddie and I, it would be Eddie would sort of act stuff out and improvise, and then come in and I would be just kind of almost in that dynamic, the kind of the sort of workhorse of just like, I'm going to build the walls and build the roof, and it may, and we'll get there, and then we can start putting in the furniture and stuff. So yeah, we all sort of we draw strengths of each other, and there are moments we went down definite rabbit holes of creating a whole universe that at one point there was whole sections and set pieces on paper of films that that will never see the light, that we never even shot, but we had to sort of tell a broader story to get into that macro story. But yeah, I definitely learned way more about kind of just balancing of knowing when to be in the drama and knowing when to be in the thriller and stuff like that, just sharpening your tools. So yeah, it's all a journey. It's all a journey. And I suppose Eddie is able to go for these big ideas. Is that right, Andy? When
Yes.
and shoot for the shoot for the moon, which is brilliant, because then you can kind of try for that and see how far we can get off the ground. And yeah, like I said, Andy and I have a history of just wanting to create. I believe there should be every character is going to be played by a very talented actor. I think every film that we make, I want, if they've got 2 lines, they've got to have 2 great lines. I want it to be well worth the talent that comes up there. So Andy and I will always make sure that all our cameos, that the spotlight will swing to this actor, and it will tell us either something about the world or about the other characters in it by their presence. They're not just going to be there as functionality. So we will always push each other in the best possible way to sort of make sure we're doing that. We did that in Set 5. We did that in 6 Minutes to Midnight, and that is really, really rewarding, because we get great cast. People say, "Oh wow, you get great casts in your films," and you go, "Yeah, well, we write lots of really good characters." So that seems to kind of pay off. Not to sound arrogant, it just giving that extra attention, because people don't. I think if you can front load, quite often now people are pushed to front load a film with their number 1 and number 2, and it's very heavy on the shoulders, I think, for those characters. And I think if a bigger ensemble means a richer cast of characters that you can enjoy, which makes for can tell a big story very swiftly with more people. Would you agree, Andy?
Totally. I think it's this felt like a natural extension of what Kel and I had embarked upon with Set Fire to the Stars. And yeah, I think it's
I rewatched Cuckoo's Nest the other day, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and you just think, has there been a better ensemble, with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? And
probably not.
You have great affection for every character, even the non-verbal characters, the guy who dances with the dicky bow, and the chap who sort of is very unsteady on his feet in the basketball, and across the board you just see this wealth of life. And yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? Sorry, I cut across you there, Andy, but
it's all right.
that's what we like doing, isn't it? We like a lot of characters.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. I'm happy to hear that, because I was going to ask, even though you've already pretty answered it, was about how, because you said that you guys push each other. Obviously, you both have already had that history together, but how has Eddie kind of changed your process as writers now and storytellers?
I think for me, it was as much as director as much as a writer. I felt this real sense of responsibility and a real sense of loyalty to kind of get this right for Eddie, because it started with Eddie, and I know how much creating a story based in his hometown, and I guess bringing it back to his hometown. We're going to have a kind of premiere there next week, and of him sort of as taken this piece of history from Bexley-on-Sea and taking it back and giving it to the people of Bexley-on-Sea, and how much it meant to him, and how even on our last day of filming, although we filmed most of the film in Wales, on our last day of filming, we went to Bexley-on-Sea in Eastbourne, where he grew up, and we were filming in locations where he used to grow up as a child. So there was a big close on the circle for Eddie. So I felt a real sense of like loyalty, like I was the keeper of the flame, and I had to get this right for him. And I think when you work with anyone, it's you discover your own shortcomings, you discover your strengths sometimes, and Eddie, I guess, as a writer, comes from a more street performing stand-up background. It's a more verbal background. It's a more kind of like pitching things in the moment, shooting from the hip. Whereas I guess me and Kel maybe from a more, even though our backgrounds and journeys have been different, but it's a more formal kind of get into the trenches with the typewriter kind of. But then we would act things out between us, and we have a dialogue between us always, and we would divvy things up and say, I'll take this bit, you take that bit, and then you might find you stall on something, and you'd say, look, I need some help with this. And Eddie was always a good script editor and a reader, and he would read stuff, and then he would give us notes, and even in the process of making it, he was still, Eddie is never off. Eddie just never switches off. So like, even when he's on the floor as Thomas Miller, there's a piece of his head that was still the writer that was coming up with ideas. So I think with Eddie, what and I've learned this from Kel as well, but Eddie has this in spades, is that it's kind of, the process is never over. It's like, and as Kellen says, it's about the best idea in the room wins. It's the best idea in the room wins. It's whatever's going to make the script a better script and the film a better film.
Sure. And Andy, was quite an interesting point here, Preston, is that Eddie he has this Chaplin-esque kind of life and career. Eddie always says, live your life like it's a movie, and there is an Eddie Izzard movie coming down the pipe, I'm sure, at some point. The idea of a street performer who went up to Edinburgh with no theatre booked, just put a hat on the cobble streets and stopped people from walking away, turning into the person who sold out the Hollywood Bowl as a stand-up to as an actor. And as Andy says, writing by bouncing material off a crowd as a comedian. There's a durability, there's a sort of bulletproof nature to Eddie Izzard that you don't get with a lot of actors. What I'm saying is, you're not so sensitive that Andy. I remember you saying to me, Andy, once, I can say anything to Eddie and he takes it on board because you.
As a director, I could give him any note, and it's like it's very thick-skinned, and I think it's because he is. And it's fascinating. It's such a, I suppose, the yin and yang of Eddie. For someone who is so, I guess, associated with these magnificent leaps of surreal imagination, and he has that. And yet at the same time, he is one of the most, and I mean this in a very affectionate way, he's one of the most pedantic people you will meet. Eddie is very logical. And I think less is more with Eddie. I think like he needs. I found my dialogue with him on the floor as actor to director is about very clear, precise, but logical notes, and logical notes based on fact. It's about, and he has to completely logically tune into something and center himself into something before he can move forward. But because of that, you can kind of tell him anything, because it's almost like the ego. He leaves the ego at the door. It's like he wants Thomas Miller, and he just wants to get it right. And he's a joy to work with for a director there, because he's so beautifully malleable to work with. Because it's as a performer, he's selfless, you know.
They are the daughters of the Nazi High Command.
Ich habe meine Befehle. Morgen Nacht.
And you assure me you haven't been compromised?
Stop, please! Germany can't afford the girls to be captured.
A war with Germany will be the end of England.
No one likes a traitor.
These girls give me hope.
This country is at war with Germany.